Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for a couple people to log on, and we'll get started. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Homelessness Response Community Webinar. My name is Susie Oki, and I'm the Community Relations Specialist for the Homelessness Response Team here at the city. We do these twice a year to keep the community updated on programs and outcomes that we've seen over the last year. Tonight, we'll be having Larry Imwali, the city's Homelessness Response Manager, presenting, as well as Evan Morrison, Executive Director of People First Santa Cruz County. Just a note regarding the question and answer portion of the night. You can send in questions throughout the webinar using the chat function. You won't be able to chat with each other, but know that all of your questions are being sent directly to the panelists. So we'll be able to look at those in advance and be prepared to answer at the end of the night. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Larry Imwali to give us some context about where we're at right now.
Great. Thank you, Susie, and good evening, everybody. I appreciate you attending our webinar this evening and looking forward to giving you some updates on our work here in the city of Santa Cruz. If you want to advance the next slide. And one more. Thank you. Wanted to start with a little bit of context before we dive in and talk about the city-specific programs. And so wanted to share recent data trends from the homeless point-in-time count for the county of Santa Cruz that's conducted every year to give you a sense of the scale, scope, and trends that we're seeing with respect to people experiencing homelessness in our county. So you can see in 2024, the census is taken each year here in Santa Cruz County in the last week of January. And so last January, the census enumerated 1,850 people experiencing homelessness countywide. That is a slight increase of about 3% over 2023, which has been a little bit of a decline over preceding years. So 2023 was the lowest count that we've seen in Santa Cruz County in nearly a decade. So the last 2 years has been a little bit flat. So progress in the right direction. One of the things that is a little bit unique here in Santa Cruz, but consistent on the West Coast, is looking at those people experiencing homelessness that are sheltered versus unsheltered. So the census found that we have 80% of people experiencing homelessness are unsheltered in Santa Cruz County, and only 20% are sheltered. If you were to go across the country to the Northeast, those numbers would be practically inverted. So that's an added element to the issue out here on the West Coast and Santa Cruz specifically. For the city of Santa Cruz, that part of the county, we've seen double-digit decreases in our count over the last 2 years. So of the 1,850 from 2024, we had 659 in the city of Santa Cruz, which was a decrease over the 1,028 the preceding year. So again, making progress in the right direction. The 2025 census took place in the last week of January. We don't have that data yet. The census is coordinated by the county continuum of care agency and a contracted research firm. So we're expecting those results typically in June or July is when we see the data that breaks it out by jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So on any complex issue such as homelessness, there's a role and a responsibility for every level of government, and importantly, for different levels of government to be working in a coordinated manner to be able to make sure that policy and resources can be aligned appropriately to make progress towards reducing homelessness. So we've got the seals of the state, the county, and the city on here. The federal government is also a partner in this. One of the big ways that they support efforts at reducing homelessness in local jurisdictions is through funding to Continuum of Cares through the Housing and Urban Development Department. So there's approximately $5.2 million that flows from the federal government to the local COC administered by the county each year to work towards resolving homelessness. Similarly, the state is a principal funder of homeless programming and services specifically, but even more broadly, health and human services. That's really a state function working with counties. You may often hear counties referred to as arm of the state entities. Essentially, they are the local providers of state-funded health and human services programming, including homelessness-related services. And certainly what we're seeing more and more lately is more of homelessness funding flowing through our health services divisions. Here in the city of Santa Cruz, we do not receive federal funding directly. We have received some statewide grants for various efforts. We've received some one-time grants to fund our shelter operations recently. We've received an encampment resolution grant to work on resolving encampments. But we don't get a direct allocation from the state like counties do in some of the large cities in the state of California. So if you think about the biggest 13 cities in the state, they get a direct allocation from the state, but smaller communities do not. So here in Santa Cruz, in addition to those one-time grant funds and specific grants that we get from the state, we rely on a lot of general fund dollars, local tax dollars, to be able to implement the programs and services that we do for our city specifically. And that's still relatively new in the city of Santa Cruz. If you think about traditional roles, historically, it's been the county agencies that provide the health and human services, and that programming that has played the largest role in homelessness, whereas cities typically have had their traditional role as land use, public safety. But more and more, given the scope and scale of the homelessness crisis, cities are having to make direct investments and take on a very active role in this work. And so the city of Santa Cruz has been doing that for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years at various levels, really building our internal infrastructure and capacity to be able to work on this issue, not in isolation, but in alignment and in coordination with our county and state partners. Next slide, please. So last year, the city adopted a homelessness response strategic plan. This was developed with a lot of community input. We conducted 8 different focus groups with people who have lived experience with homelessness, people who were in our programs. We reached out to business. We talked to our internal teams. We talked to community partners who are also working in this space. And we also implemented an online community survey to inform this that was responded to by nearly 700 respondents in the city of Santa Cruz. So this plan built on the previous 2 years. We had the first city homelessness response action plan, but we went through a formal strategic planning process to identify our priorities. If you'll see on the chart on the slide, we have 5 focus areas of this work. Those are kind of the major buckets, if you will, that organize the work we do in this space. The first is building capacity and partnerships. As I mentioned, this is still a relatively new space that the city is operating in. So we've had to build our internal capacity. That's through our homelessness response division, through our homeless response field crew in public works. We have a PD team with 2 police officers and 2 CSOs. So we built that internal capacity to be able to do our part of the work. And then we also are working in partnership, again, as I mentioned, with other county agencies and community-based organizations that are also in this work. So we fund some of those services. We work in partnership. We have our outreach team that works in coordination and connects people to those services. So that's one big part of the work. The second is affordable and supportive housing. This is critical. The solution to homelessness is housing, and that requires the development of additional deeply affordable housing. And the City of Santa Cruz has made incredible progress in this area in the last few years. And there's a lot more units in the pipeline, but this is really an integral piece of the work. As well, environmental stewardship. As I mentioned, a more traditional role for cities is maintaining public spaces. And so the environmental stewardship component, working on managing the impacts of encampments, trying to mitigate and minimize the impact of encampments on our waterways and out into the bay. The other large component of our work, where we focus a lot of energy and resources, is in shelter, care, and support. So this would include the safe sleeping and shelter and safe parking programs that the city operates. We'll make considerable investment. We've been able to expand our capacity by 165 spaces in the last 3 years. And the final piece is public safety, which is, a critical city role in making sure that we're creating a safe environment for both housed and unhoused residents in our community. Next slide, please. So within the strategic plan, we have some big broad goals sort of that are defining the direction and the outcomes that we're trying to see. So first and foremost, we're trying to decrease the level of homelessness and reduce homelessness in our community. An important part of that, too, is also working to prevent people from entering into homelessness. One of the things that we're seeing statewide, certainly, and also a national trend, is we're developing more robust homelessness response systems that are able to move people out of homelessness into housing. But what we're seeing is there are more people falling into homelessness than the system is capable of moving through that. So we're seeing more coming in than we're able to get out. So prevention is a real big focus. It's a lot cheaper and easier on everyone in a community if we can prevent people from falling into homelessness rather than interventions that are required once people lose their housing. So as I mentioned, what's integral to that is increasing of affordable housing units in our community. So that continues to be an important facet of the work and a goal. Also reducing the impacts of encampments and protecting our environment, and continuing to build regional capacity and partnerships. In a small community like Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County, we all have to be working together in collaboration and pooling our resources if we're going to have the impact we need to reduce homelessness. Next slide, please. And to kind of sum up the context, really that want to highlight Santa Cruz's commitment to remain committed to providing supportive services, affordable housing, and shelter options, and prioritize fostering partnerships and community organizations. And really, this is thinking about the changing legal and policy context that some of you may be following lately, where we're really seeing with the grants pass decision from the Supreme Court and the governor's executive order on encampments, really here we're remaining committed to having an approach that really promotes outreach, service connection, engagement, and shelter to move people on a pathway towards housing as our approach here in the city. Next slide, please. So now I want to move away from context, talk a little more specifically about the programs in the city. So the first area I want to talk about is our approach to encampment response. There's really the three major areas that this graphic tries to highlight. And so when we work in an encampment response space, encampment resolution space, we start with homeless services. Begins with our outreach team that's going out in the community. And I'll talk a little bit more about their work specifically, but in this space, really engaging people well in advance of the closure of any and cleanup of any encampment, making repeated efforts to engage them, have conversations about shelter, other services, trying to let people know what the timeline is for the closure of that encampment, encouraging them to make provisions and plans for their next location. Like I said, facilitating those connections to services and shelter where possible. As I mentioned, that's why the shelter capacity that the city sponsors is critical to have those spaces so that we can offer shelter to everyone through this process. And that's where we have important partnerships with nonprofit organizations that are providing those supportive services and those connections that people need, county partners, state funding that helps support some of this work as well. So those partnerships are key to being able to do encampment response in a human-centered way. And of course, then we've got the work of our public safety teams and our public works teams that have responsibilities for public safety and environmental stewardship. Um, their work on the day of the closure, working with people, and then working to restore our open spaces or street spaces to their original condition after the closure of the encampments. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, really the foundation of the work we do in homelessness response is our outreach team. The city employs 3 full-time outreach workers, and they are really out there in the community every day, meeting people where they are at. And I mean that both physically, where people are located, and kind of where they are in terms of their situation and their needs, and working with them to engage them, build trust, build rapport, and get them on the road to supports and on a pathway towards housing. So this work starts with them, and they're critical to it. Every day they engage between 30 and 40 people. Some days they are working all across the city. Sometimes it's focused in a more specific area, but the reach is broad, and they're really critical and work with so many different community partners. They're that conduit. They're not solving every problem on their own, but rather they're building that rapport with folks and getting them to connect to the services that they say they need, and trying to resolve that. So their work is critical, but it's also done in partnership with so many providers in the community. And as I mentioned, a big part of this work is really trying to work not just a service connection, but also get people into shelter and other pathways to housing. Next slide, please. Our safe sleeping and shelter program. So the city sponsors 2 different programs, the 1220 River Street Transitional Community Camp and the City Overlook at the Armory. The 1220 River Street Transitional Community Camp is a tent-based program. It is self-managed by program participants. That location, that program can serve up to 30 people at a time. As I mentioned, it's self-managed. It's got, in terms of facilities and supports, in addition to the tents that are provided for the program participants, we've got hygiene facilities with shower, restrooms, cooking facilities. Each participant works with our outreach team to develop an individualized service plan. There's connections to community programs and service providers based off of that plan. Some service providers come to 1220 to meet with participants. As I mentioned, it's self-managed, and the participants have roles within the community and support that community. It is not staffed 24/7. Our outreach team is on site each day to connect with folks, but for the most part, it's self-managed. Since we started that program in January of 2022, I believe we've had 147 people participate in that program, of which 69 people have attained housing. So that's right about 50% success rate for that program. The larger program is the City Overlook up at the Armory in De La Vega Park. That program has space for 135 people. That program is operated by People First of Santa Cruz County. As of last August, the Salvation Army had operated that program for 2+ years for the city before that. So that program is also tent-based. We have some of the program is inside the Armory building, and about half of it is outside. Similarly, we brought in hygiene and infrastructure, shower trailer, restrooms. There's 2 meals a day that are provided through a vendor working with People First. And again, we also have some services that come up on site. Evan might talk about this a little bit later in his part of the presentation, but they also have case managers and housing navigation that's taking place working with participants in that program up at that site. I think to date, that program opened in May of 2022, and so far to date, we've served over 700 people during that time. And again, this is a shelter or safe sleeping location that would be considered low barrier. The idea is to lower those entry barriers so it's going to work for more people. We allow pets, possessions, partners, again, to encourage people to accept the shelter opportunity. Next slide, please. The city also sponsors safe parking programs. The city operates an overnight safe parking program for oversized vehicles. This is part of the oversized vehicle ordinance implementation. Utilizing downtown parking lots. This is a way that people can have a safe place to park without being cited for violation of the oversized vehicle ordinance. Again, it's a free program. We provide hygiene at the locations that we use. We presently have capacity for 32 vehicles overnight. Our enrollment has been between 14 and 16 for the last several months, so we have additional capacity. But if there's an increase in demand, we're able to go up to the 32 spaces that we have available. So we open or close particular lots based off of the enrollment at any particular time. And we've also had some people from our overnight program move into the long-term oversized vehicle parking program, also up at the Armory, like the City Overlook shelter. People First of Santa Cruz County operates this program as well on the same site. The long-term is 24/7. Long-term, there's case management that's provided, housing navigation, the kinds of services you would see at a shelter. To work with people to move towards long-term housing solutions that aren't in their vehicles. And Evan, I suspect Evan will talk a little bit about this program as well. Next slide, please. For the last 3 seasons, we've been working with the County of Santa Cruz to open severe weather shelters during inclement weather that reach a certain threshold. And here in Santa Cruz County, that criteria is involved having 2 consecutive nights where the temperature gets to 38 degrees or below, or if we have significant rainfall that could pose flood risk conditions. And so we work with, this year, it's a little bit new, even though it's our 3rd year, we're working directly through the county's Emergency Operations Department, OR3, to look at the forecasts and to make the decision on the activation. We have a North County site and a South County site for this program, utilizing the Betts Halls, both in Santa Cruz and Watsonville. We've got a combined capacity at maximum capacity of around 110 when we fully utilize those two spots. In the past, we've also used the Depot Park Freight Building in the city as another location when we've had scheduling conflicts for other events that have been scheduled at the Vets Hall. So we, again, try to be collaborative with our partners to come up with other options. And most recently, we had a community partner, Vintage Faith Church in Santa Cruz, that was able to open its multi-purpose room when we had a scheduling conflict at the Vets Hall. So a lot of collaboration to make this work. People First has been our operator of this program countywide as well over the last 3 seasons. And I think in total last year, we were able to we activated under that criteria for 15 nights due to the weather. And there was just over 300 different people that took advantage and availed upon the severe weather shelter during that season. Again, many people utilized it for multiple nights during that activation, but 300 different people came through those doors last season. And so this season we're continuing again, and I believe we've operated, it's either 15 or 16 so far as we're kind of winding down on our winter season. But this has been a good partnership and a good addition to our programming. Next slide, please. So want to talk a little bit about outcomes now from our programming, what we've seen change through the services that we've operated directly and in partnership with other community-based organizations in the county. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we saw last year in our point in time count, we saw a 36% decrease. That's the second consecutive year of a double-digit decrease. So that gives us an indication that we're moving in the right direction. Still a lot of work to be done, but encouraged by the progress. There's over 1,100 units of affordable housing that have been developed or in the process of development. So that's going to add much needed capacity to be able to work towards reducing homelessness in our community. We've moved 333 people into more stable housing and shelter. And that's just through the city programs. That's not through programs and services from other organizations that have also contributed to that outcome. Next slide, please. We've been able, over this last 2+ years, been able to serve over 1,000, nearly 1,100 people in our shelter and safe parking programs. We've connected 140 people and reconnected 140 people with their friends and family through our Homeward Bound program. And our public works field crew has been able to remove over 1,300 tons of refuse from our public spaces during this time. Progress that's been made. And as I mentioned, we've got a lot of work still in front of us, but making some good progress. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Evan Morrison, who's the Executive Director of People First of Santa Cruz County. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have him here with us tonight. Prior to launching People First of Santa Cruz County as a full-service homeless services agency, Evan did outreach on the streets and in the woods of Santa Cruz County, working with homeless vets. He helped homeless veterans get into and maintain their housing. He managed a homeless shelter, and he helped veterans navigate the complex and often confusing medical systems available to them. Evan has overseen the publication and the distribution of the Free Guide here in Santa Cruz County since 2018. And he also served on the city's Community Advisory Council on Homelessness, the CATCH, as it was referred to, in 2019 and 2020. Thanks for joining us this evening, Evan.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Hello, everyone. What I'd actually like to talk about I mean, there's a ton of stuff to touch on, but what I thought would make the biggest difference to talk about is kind of the long road to housing, or in other words, why does it take so long to get someone housed once they get into shelter or not? And so I'm going to invite you to engage in a little bit of a thought experiment. I'm going to assume that most of you here are housed, and if you're like me, I'm also housed. If I became homeless today, I have friends that would probably let me sleep on their couch. I have a resume that I could send out to potential employers. I have an ID. I have all my paper, legal paperwork. I have a phone. I have my health is relatively under control. It's not going to flare up at any given moment. And I have, I'm used to getting up in the morning and going and being productive and then going to bed at night. And I'm accustomed to getting food in my belly and taking care of all my daily needs. Most of the folks we work with, when they come to us, that day when they have their stuff in order is months or years in the past. And something else that we have to grapple with when we're providing services to folks is that we don't have an abundance of affordable housing in Santa Cruz County. So when we're helping someone get housed, that person has to compete in the general housing market. And someone who's sleeping on the sidewalk or in a park is often not prepared to do that. And so what I view what shelter gives the opportunity to for folks to do is to take the steps necessary so they can compete in the regular housing market. So what does that mean? So when we get folks that we're working with, they often have no ID, they don't have their social security card, they don't have their general paperwork, they don't have a phone. Folks often don't have money on them. Folks will also have unresolved medical issues, or they know they have a medical issue, but they don't know what it is. Some folks know they have a disability. Some folks have a disability and don't know they have a disability. Also, becoming homeless and then being homeless causes trauma, and folks have undiagnosed PTSD and or other known or unknown mental health challenges. Folks are possibly addicted to street drugs or alcohol. Folks don't have those habits that those of us who are housed and holding down jobs have, and they're out of that practice, and it actually takes effort and work to get back into that practice. And also, folks often have strong feelings of shame, unworthiness, being lesser than other people, and all of those feelings are demotivators. When it comes to us doing the work to help people get housed, part of what we got to do is we got to motivate folks. So when we're trying to answer the question of why does it take so long to help folks get housed? Generally, to get ID, that takes a few weeks. If you got to get a birth certificate, that can take months sometimes. Sorting out complex medical issues often takes months with every person we work with. And a good half of the folks we work with who have complex medical issues really don't know what they are when they start working with us. Getting folks mental health support for their PTSD or other undiagnosed mental health stuff, that's often takes a while to unpack and to disentangle all the different things that are going on. So that's another thing that takes months. Helping folks to reduce drug and alcohol intake to levels at which they can be functional in the world is another thing that we're lucky if it takes weeks. That generally takes months as well. Building healthy habits happens over a months-long period, and building positive thoughts about oneself. And then finally, and most important in this community, is establishing a means to pay for a unit. For some folks, that's going to mean going and finding a job and holding down a job for a while, enough that they can pay rent. And we got to look at, even entry-level work in this county can take 3 to 6 months to find. And then for other people, There's getting a housing voucher in one form or another. Some folks will qualify for those relatively quickly. And notice I said qualify. It still takes quite a while to get a voucher after you qualify for it. Some folks have to go through a lot just to qualify for a voucher. Some folks have to go through the whole process of figuring out what their disability is or the medical conditions are or getting their mental health addressed. That takes months just to get into the door to qualify for a voucher. So you notice all these things I listed can take months at a time. So as I found myself saying earlier today, I think there's kind of, and though we have yet to find the actual hard data on this, my gut tells me that there's kind of a bell curve when it comes to people who are living outdoors. That there's a small number of folks who can get housed in 3 to 6 months. Those people too do exist. I think there's a large amount of folks who realistically are going to get housed in 6 months to a year and a half. And then there's another small amount of folks on the other end of the bell curve who it's probably realistic that it's going to take 18 months to 2.5 years of working with them to get housed. And I want to be clear, I'm saying this just out of experience. Again, there isn't hard data on this kind of thing. There's some folks who are in relatively simple situations. A lot of folks, especially in this community, have been homeless for a long time and have a lot of barriers to overcome. And then there are some folks on the other end who I would say have really complicated cases, have a lot of different stuff that needs to be disentangled, who we try multiple avenues with and fail before we find what's going to work. I'm looking at my notes here. Yeah, so that is what I have to say about why it's not an easy, straightforward, or quick process to help people get housed in Santa Cruz County. One of the things that I view that shelter makes possible is shelter provides a space to take care of or to handle all that stuff. I believe that what I just enumerated is a huge project for each of these folks. And it's really hard to do that when you're living outdoors, when you're having to go find your food every day, when you're hoping that your stuff isn't stolen. And it can take, for those of you who've done this work, because I see some of you on the list, I know some of you who do this work, you know that it can be a full-time job just staying alive when you're homeless to then undertake this whole project or these multiple projects at the same time is really more than is fair to ask of someone. So that is kind of our overall theoretical approach to providing shelter at the Armory and at RV safe parking. And then I just did want to address the extreme weather shelter as well. For some of you, you may be wondering, why do an extreme weather shelter? So it is something that's hard to quantify when and where the negative outcomes happen. But what I can tell you is that negative outcomes do happen when we don't have an extreme weather shelter or a winter shelter of some kind. Getting people in from the cold and from the rain keeps folks alive. And it also, especially in a lot of rain and stormy weather events, people can bring in their prized possessions like their ID, their birth certificates, their social security card. When those things go missing, now, and they're outdoors, especially now, we're looking at another 3 to 6 months of them having to go and get that stuff together again before they can continue to make progress in their lives. And so that's a little bit of why it matters to have an extreme weather shelter, for these stormy nights. And knowing that I'm sure I'll be answering more questions in the Q&A, I will pass it back to Larry for now, if he's ready.
Great. Thank you, Evan. Appreciate your perspectives and work in this field and sharing your experience with everybody in the community. So with that, I think we've reached the Q&A session. So I will turn it over to Susie to moderate this part of the program.
Actually, Larry, we still have the priority slide.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so now with that context, we talked about our programs and some of our outcomes and successes so far, but really want to share with you all kind of our priority areas moving forward in the near term. And it involves continuing our collaboration. As I mentioned, in a small county like Santa Cruz, we have to pull our resources and be working in alignment with our county, state, and federal partners and our community partners in this work. So that's critical to develop and continue to grow this ecosystem to be able to do this work. That requires ongoing sustainable funding. I think that's been one of the challenges in this environment is a lot of the work is about piecing together a lot of one-time, 1 year or 2 year grants. So really trying to find that ongoing sustainable funding. As I noted for the City of Santa Cruz, our real ongoing funding has really relied on general fund local tax dollars to be able to do this work. So trying to continue to find resources from the state to continue this work is critical. As noted, the solution is housing. So continuing to prioritize affordable, permanent, supportive housing development in our community to create more spaces to work to getting people housed is key. Part of this work is working towards the development of future navigation center. The city acquired the property at 125 Coral Street a couple of years ago, and we're in the process of applying for grant funds to be able to develop out a navigation center to provide supportive services and shelter and interim housing for folks. Continuing to work through our encampment resolution funding to be able to work to resolve encampments in a human-centered way. We're working to get people into interim housing and supportive services as we resolve encampments. We're doing this work for this specific encampment resolution grant with Housing Matters as another important partner that we're moving towards trying to resolve some of the issues on Coral Street and expanding additional interim housing that we have available. So that's critical work. And as I think I also mentioned early on when we were talking about our strategic plan, an eviction prevention program, really trying to put resources at the front end so that we can keep people in housing and not have to rely so much on interventions and supports after people have lost their housing. So those are our priority areas moving forward. And we're looking forward to continuing to make progress. And as I mentioned, there's still a lot of work ahead of us, but we've made some good gains that we want to build on. So next slide.
Next slide. All right, we're going to start the Q&A section of the presentation right now. And for the people who have asked, the meeting is being recorded, and a link will be sent out via the city's social media, and everyone who registered for the event will also get a link that you can share with your communities and with your colleagues. So the first question is around shelter. How do people find out about shelter, and do a lot of people accept shelter when offered? I'm going to punt that one to Larry and our great work our outreach team is doing.
Yeah, I think from the city's perspective, our outreach team is really that front line in their work being out in the community, engaging folks who are experiencing homelessness, starting those conversations to connect them to shelter and or other services. So you can contact the outreach team. The outreach team is out there proactively trying to have those conversations. And I would say, the city team is not alone. There's other organizations and providers out in the community that are doing similar work, that are meeting people where they're at. and other service providers that people can get connected with who can help connect people to shelter and other interim housing options. And yes, people do accept shelter. I think a lot of times, particularly people who have experienced homelessness for long periods of time, oftentimes it takes a long time to build that rapport. It's kind of similar to what Evan was talking about in his presentation. So it's not always the first time that you engage a person and ask and inquire about shelter that gets them on that pathway. Sometimes it's not the 5th time. Sometimes it's not the 10th time. Sometimes it's the 20th time. Everybody's journey is different. But that's the importance of building that rapport and that repeated engagement so that when somebody is at a place where that's the right decision for them, we can be there to support that and move them along that pathway and get them connected to shelter.
I have a question here about the mental health and addiction issues on the street. And this person is specifically asking, how is the city addressing this problem?
So there is a good deal of co-occurrence of mental health and substance abuse and addiction issues within the unhoused community, just like these issues are present in our housed community. So I talked a lot about partnerships in various ways, and so this is an area in which we rely on our community partners a great deal to support us in those efforts. So we work with the County Health Services Agency. You know, as I mentioned, I'll keep mentioning our outreach team and all their tremendous work. But again, they connect people to those services, whether it's through a county agency or other nonprofit providers that are providing mental health or treatment services. We also directly we help support in partnership with the county, funding some mental health services through the downtown outreach workers that are in the downtown area that are connecting people and responding to mental health issues, mental health liaisons that work with our police department. They're an alternative response that can provide that resource when there's a call that requires that kind of intervention. So we support that as well. And so through those connections with other service providers, some of our direct resourcing of programs and capacity in the community are how we're working on this. We also continue to work with the county, I think, in advocacy roles and trying to expand behavioral health and treatment options in our community. Really trying to work towards having sufficient capacity within our local system to serve everybody that needs it. So we're engaged in that conversation as well.
All right, let's move to the next question. It's more focused on kind of budget and the changes at the federal government. So President Trump recently moved to slash the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. How does the city work with this agency, and how would it change? How would this change affect the city's homelessness response efforts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We'll see how that plays out. So it was just Friday last week when an executive order came down from the president to effectively eliminate this agency. I think the language is to reduce it to its minimally statutory requirements since it was established by statute through Congress. But they're developing plans. I was actually just on a call this morning that they facilitate. So the way we work with that agency directly is they have some regional advisors that work with different parts of the country. And we have one here for California. And that senior regional advisor, along with one of their peers, facilitates a monthly call among cities all along the Western United States. And so they facilitate these peer-to-peer calls once a month, and they're really learning opportunities. So we hear what other communities are doing on different aspects of this work, whether it's safe parking programs, what people are doing for encampment response, what people are doing to improve housing outcomes. So each month there's a different topic presented by a different community. So they've really created this kind of learning environment and helped foster connections among communities. So, now I can reach out to colleagues in Berkeley or in San Jose, or sometimes it's been as far away as Boulder or Hawaii, to hear what they're doing that's innovative, what they're trying, what's working, and we share our experiences as well. So USICH has done that specifically for this community, and they've been a resource. I also have a once a month call with them to just talk about the work we're doing, and again, leveraging their connections across the Western US to help inform and get ideas of who we should be connected to and talk to on various issues. So it's been really useful and effective. I think the total department has 20 people. So if it loses any capacity, it's not going to have the ability to do much of anything. So we'll see where that goes with a lot of these things, but that's how we connect with them.
This is a more specific question related to the homelessness response budget for the city. How much of the city's budget is federally funded?
In the homelessness space, we do not have any federal funds that we receive directly from the federal government. So our resources come through state grants and through local general fund tax dollars.
We have a few questions related to the PIT count and data. Some of you have sent in very specific questions. So if you have sent in super specific questions, if you could include your email address, then we can get back to you. But for the webinar right now, I'm going to just go with some of the more general questions. Does the HMIS data back up the 36% decrease observed in the PIT count? I'm going to punt that one to Evan. And if you could describe for people who do not know what HMIS is, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So HMIS stands for Health Management Information System, I believe. In this county, we use a piece of software called Clarity to do that. What it essentially is it's a database of people who are homeless in this community who are receiving services of one kind or another. I'm not an expert on how well maintained that database is, and I can't tell you, like, for instance, how many people are in it either. But what I will say, the difference between HMIS and the point in time count is the point in time count is literally a count that happens one morning. So it's if the point in time count is effective, it's capturing everyone in the region who's homeless that day. HMIS is capturing everyone who's homeless probably over about a 2 to 3 year period in our county. Folks eventually, as they engage in services, get put into HMIS. Neither of them are perfect. Like, neither system is capturing every person who's homeless, but HMIS is a much bigger snapshot, and it's also going to have folks who aren't going to be captured by something like a point in time count. Like, you'll get folks in HMIS who are in some sort of homeless prevention program. You'll get folks in HMIS who are on a friend's couch or technically have a roof over their head, but are still considered homeless. Whereas that's not going to happen in the point in time count. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we have a couple of questions related to encampment management. The first one is, what is the best way for someone to inform the city about an encampment in my neighborhood? So I'll take that one. You can use the city's online CRISP portal to report an encampment in your neighborhood. You can just go to the link on our homepage for the city's homelessness response team and click on submit a concern. So that's the first part of that. The second question on encampment management, one of the circles in the strategic plan includes community safety or public safety. What is being done to protect the housed community from the perceived unacceptable public conduct of the unhoused?
Yeah, so within that focus area, really the focus is on equitable enforcement of the law, which is our legal requirement. So the city's approach I've mentioned this in a lot of different ways, and I'll try to make it specific to this context. So there's both the proactive outreach work that our team does, trying to engage people experiencing homelessness and trying to move them on a pathway. So I imagine the kind of interactions that this question is focused on, hopefully we can minimize those. We also have a dedicated, as I mentioned, within the Santa Cruz PD, a team of officers and CSOs who focus on homelessness response. So they have specific experience, training, they worked with people experiencing homelessness. So they operate citywide like our outreach team does and provide a focused response for situations that involve people experiencing homelessness. So they're part of the response to these kinds of issues. There's also a broader role with our PD department in general calls for service. If there's situations where there are crimes being committed, again, be the case whether people are housed or unhoused. So our PD respond that way, and again, equitably enforce the law. Again, within our resources too, trying to respond to calls citywide and various priorities. Among some of the other approaches, as I mentioned, specific to this population, we have county behavioral health workers, mental health liaisons that can co-respond with our police to come onto those calls where people are experiencing mental health challenges, so we can bring hopefully the right response, right resources and set of skills to help work on those situations. So it's multifaceted, I think, in trying to tackle those situations.
I have a general question for groups that are interested in helping. What are some ways that people can get involved? I'll punt that to Evan and Larry if you want to chime in.
It's hard to answer that in a general way. I mean, there's certainly community groups that go out amongst folks who are homeless and like hand out food and water and that kind of thing. There are certainly we receive donations of clothing and supplies, when we're doing shelters and that sort of stuff. I would almost, my gut is if you have a more specific ask or that doesn't answer your question, go ahead and contact me, and I'd be glad, any group that wants to get more involved, I would be glad to give them more specific advice tailored to them. Because I do think it takes our whole community taking some sort of effort to address homelessness, and I want to always have an open door for people.
Okay, I want to be mindful of the time, so I'm going to take just a couple more questions. A few folks on the call are interested in finding out what's happening on Coral Street. So I'll punt that to Larry.
Sure. So as I mentioned, Coral Street continues to be an area of focus for the city. We applied for and received an Encampment Resolution Fund grant from the state to focus some efforts on that location. And we're partnering with Housing Matters, which shares its address at Coral Street as the partner in doing this work. So we're rolling out those services to really take a more intentional and resource-intensive approach to trying to work on Coral Street in a way that is human-centered. So specifically through that grant, we've been able to expand our outreach capacity by a little bit to focus on that area. The grant is allowing Housing Matters to hire their own outreach staff, including some folks with substance abuse, resource specialists that have some specialized training, and really working to engage people that are camped along Coral Street, engage them, the same kind of methods that I've talked about in describing outreach work, and working to get them on a pathway to services and to shelter. And one of the big pieces that we're working on through this grant is to develop an additional 20 to 25 units of interim housing. So this could be additional capacity, that it wouldn't be emergency shelter, it would be interim housing where people could stay for up to 18 months or 2 years through this process. But really to move them into that interim housing, continue to have those supportive services to work with them to get them into permanent housing. So that is one of the sort of the strategic efforts to try to work to improve conditions on Coral Street and try to work to prevent the re-encampment that we continue to see on Coral Street. I can tell you on an ongoing basis, our teams are out there. Our public works field crew is multiple times a week, is out there collecting refuse and cleaning up Coral Street. Our PD and fire respond to numerous calls on a regular basis out on Coral Street. We're also working with our public works team and looking at some different environmental design issues that can improve safety and also work to try to mitigate the re-encampment along those streets. So we're trying a lot of different things and implementing a number of different strategies. And really, principally, what we want to be able to do is move people off the street and on a pathway towards housing.
This will be our last question. What is the city doing with homeless people who don't want housing?
Yeah, that's more challenging. It's got to be voluntary. We continue to enforce our ordinances when we have to close encampments for public safety or health reasons. People have to comply with those orders. But ultimately, it requires repeated engagement and relationship building to work with somebody to get them to a place where they're ready to get into shelter. And so I think first and foremost, I guess my response would be they may not want shelter today, or they might not be interested in housing today or having that conversation today. But we have to continue to be persistent and work with that person so that we're there trying to make inroads to get them ready, to change their mind, and to be there when they're making that decision that that's the right path so we can support that.
Evan, do you want to add anything to that, just as a final comment?
I do, yeah. I've worked with a lot of folks in this community at this point. I've been doing this work for 7 years. Very few people I've encountered didn't want housing, and all of those folks didn't want housing for 2 reasons. One, because they actually could get housing somewhere else and needed to go back home. 2, they didn't believe it was possible for them. And once I or some of my colleagues were able to show them that it was possible, then they absolutely wanted housing.
All right, next slide, Katie. So this is the end of our webinar. Thank you so much to everybody who submitted questions. We didn't get to all of the questions. If you feel like you would like your question answered and it was not, please contact me, Susie. I'm the person that sent out the webinar invite, so you all have access to my email. As we're signing off, I just invite you all to stay in touch with the city. We have a homelessness response newsletter that goes out quarterly that kind of gives you updates between these webinar events. You can find all of that information at cityofsantacruz.com/homelessness, and you can find Evan at peoplefirst.scc.org. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your participation and interest in this topic. We really need everybody to be part of the conversation. And I think this is one way that we can do that in an ongoing way. So have a good night, everyone, and we'll talk soon.